Bill, when you was little,
Yes, sir.
you told me about them driving them cattle and how you got paid and all that. And I'd like for people to know, there's people that don't have any idea how to saddle a horse or how to set them pony.
Well,
I mean, they don't. They don't know which end the blanket goes. They don't know nothing about it. So, and then when you got to the cattle, how you shaped them up, how you drove them, you know.
well, it was all very simple. There were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 grown men, and we drove the cattle down one side of the river, just grazed. Cattle
Piddling
handled well, and we
They were
just
broke.
kept them together.
They were
and
broke to
grazed
drive.
them. And then we would drift them into the water around about noon and let them water, and then we would, after we had eaten lunch, we would graze them on further down the river, and they had pens up scattered around these 2 rivers, and we would pen the cattle late in the evening. Then we would lope back home and spend the night. And the next morning we'd lope back down there and let our cattle out again and graze another day around. And we just kept moving in a circle down the rivers and back up. And
Now that's the Mulberry.
Mulberry and the Prairie Dog Fork of Red River. And then we would come back up Red River to about south of where we started with on Mulberry, and then we would go up Battle Creek a little ways, and then we would pen the cattle down here. There was a lake down here, and we'd pen them there.
Can you hear?
Then we would come back and start down the other side of the river.
And you were riding?
Well, yeah, that's the only way
I'm talking
we
about.
could
I'm
move.
talking about what were you riding?
Huh?
What were you riding?
Oh, I was riding a Shetland then.
Shetland pony.
Yeah, and I was just 6 to start with, and I did that for about, I think, 2 or 3 years. I don't know. And anyway, we would graze the cattle on the other side of the river so they'd have fresh grass still.
Question.
And then when we came back, then we'd go back down this side.
Question.
And it would take us about a week to make that circle.
When you crossed the river, was it still a lot boggy places and a lot of quicksand on that old river?
The quicksand on Mulberry has never been real dangerous. So when it's real wet and everything, a horse will bog about to his knees. But on Red River, you have to stay out of it.
And how do you do that, Bill?
We just kept the cattle out of the river. The grass was on the banks anyway.
Yeah.
We just stayed out of the river, but we didn't get on the south side of Red River because we didn't cross the river.
Yeah.
And we would we do that for the summer, and then in the fall, Mr. Lott owns some more country southeast of here, and they would move their cows when we started school. They'd move the cows down there, and they would winter the cattle down there on different fresh pasture, and it
but
worked
all this
out.
time you were learning cattle.
Oh,
You
I
learned how cattle,
well,
how
sure.
cattle act.
I learned an awful lot about cattle at a very unusually young age.
That's a
And
blessing. That was a blessing.
I know one time I was a little late when they let cattle out down here at the lake, and I loped down there, and just as I got there, they turned them out, and there were some dogs there. They started barking, and those cattle got scared, and they got into a real big mill, about 150 head of cows, and they were just running in a circle, and as cattle mill like that, well, the circle gets tighter and
That's
tighter
right.
and
That's right.
tighter.
Hotter and hotter and hotter.
And then they start rearing up on each other in the middle, and cattle start getting down.
And getting stomped.
Well, Mr. Walker had we 2 kids, and that other man, and they tried to ease in there to peel them, break the mill, to peel them to the outside, and we tried to help him, and he'd keep us to the outside, and we couldn't stop them there for quite a little while, and boy, they just in a dead run, and finally several cattle got stacked up right there in the center of the mill, and Mr. Walker and this other fella rushed in kind of a gap there and got them swung out, and then we 2 kids took them on out, down the road to keep them moving, and heck, that thing just broke itself up like that, and nothing flat. And it didn't hurt any of the cattle, but I'd never seen cattle
mill
like that, and I've never seen much of that ever happen again.
After a stampede.
And, well...
Get them milling.
We didn't ever get into stampedes in my time. They did that in the open range when they're trailing cattle. That's when they had all the stampedes. And as I grew up through the 30s, no one had any money, and it was quite an experience. And my mother and father took me down to see my grandparents east of Dallas, and we started meeting trains. These were freight trains coming up 1260, and the first train we saw was just loaded like a refugee train. There were people on top of the cars. There were families. In every empty boxcar, there was full of people, and people were on top of the cars. Several men were on top of the engine, and every train we met on that trip was loaded like that, every freight train. And it was really something to see, and since then I've seen pictures and things of refugee trains, but that was something to see.
Broke your heart.
I have no idea how many people were on that train, but they would come from Fort Worth to Amarillo, and then they got off at Amarillo, most of them, and caught a train on the Santa Fe, and they hauled them to California. And they were going to California to try to get jobs. And
You know, I think it was city
quite
people.
an experience, but I just thought I'd mention that.
That's good. They was,
For the times,
Yeah.
because people don't realize. I had a calf that Dad had given me, and we sold him. The trader came by one day, and we sold that calf. I think he brought $7. He was a big fat calf ready to make beef out of. I think he brought $7, and then.
well, what would $7 buy at that time, Bill?
Well, it would buy a lot.
That's what I'm talking about.
It,
$7 was a lot of money.
Oh yeah, it was the real thing. It didn't take any money to buy something. In fact, at that very time, you could have bought an acre of land or more with it. And in 1941, after the Depression was actually breaking, we took a cattleman magazine, and it had advertisement in the back of it, and it for real estate. And you could buy any ranch in the Texas Panhandle that was for sale for $7 an acre. And if you went to New Mexico, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming,
Kansas.
You could buy any size ranch you wanted for $2 an acre. They had ranches of 5,000 acres, or you could buy 50,000 acres. Whatever, if you had $2, you could own them. And people just regarded land nearly as valueless, because, you know, they had always had a lot of open range, and it was fabulous.
Yeah.
I read one time that George Littlefield had a bunch of the Canadian River stocked with about 15,000 head of cows.
Mama cows.
And they were they had a man up there, he spent the summer with Mr. Littlefield, and he offered him all of that country down the Canadian River from Tascosa that he wanted for 75 cents an acre, and Mr. Littlefield wouldn't buy it. And he had, he had worlds of cattle everywhere.
How come?
Well, he didn't want it for some reason, and
I mean, the ground's good, right? The country was good.
Oh, well, yeah, but I'll tell you, they'd been through some bad times. They'd had those cold winters that mopped out all of the cattle up north, and that broke everyone in the cow business up there. And it came clear down to the Canadian River. In fact, it broke a person that used to have a ranch here at that time. And he was up there on the north side of the Canadian. And he lost 2 ranches on account of it. And they were about 50,000 acre ranches each.
Pretty good size.
Yeah,
piece
and
of
they
ground.
put him completely out of business. They always said if he had sold one of them, he could have saved the other, but he wouldn't, and they took it all away from him finally. But anyway, that's just a little picture of how.
How old were you then, Bill? Do you remember?
Well, I wasn't here then. I was born in 25, and all of this happened back in 80s till
No, I'm talking about when you saw the train.
Oh, when I saw the train, I guess I was 7, 8 years old.
That had to make just a big impression.
Well, it did.
Just
And, you know, I think I told you before, I'm not sure.
That's all right. Tell
I
it
went
again.
to school here when I started. There were 140 kids going to school at Hickman.
yeah.
And by the time I was in the 6th grade, there were only 3 kids going to Hickman School. The people had left the country, and actually the machine age had come in, and that's what caused it. But
Laid off a bunch of people in the ranch and farming
the
business.
children that went to that school were the best bunch of kids I ever saw. And even when I went to high school, I went to Lakeview, which was a much larger school. And the kids there were wonderful people to know. There had one or two knotheads, I guess, in the whole school, but they had the best morals. And
Where did they learn it, Bill?
at home.
At home.
Every one of those kids were raised on these farms,
And ranches.
Their parents taught them to work when they were young because they had to have the help.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
mechanization has changed this entire country. It's changed all of the people. And today, the children are growing up with broken families and maybe 2 or 3 different mothers and dads of one family,
that's right.
and you can't ever. And the children are not, don't even understand what discipline is. And if one of their school teachers ever looked cross-eyed them, well, the mother and dad come up and jump on the school teacher.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But they don't go to the mother and dad don't go to the trouble to teach their children discipline. And the school teachers are not allowed to, and so we're growing up thousands of people with absolutely no background from home,
No
and
moral
and no discipline, or very little morals. And
Well, let me ask you a question, Bill.
All right, sir.
If you were president, what would you do?
Well, I don't think one man can change what's happened.
I don't either, but
And I think we have a president who's tried to change, and all of the news services on top of him continually, and I don't know how he stands to even be president.
well, what I'm asking is, I mean, he ain't bluffing.
Well, he's a businessman,
That's right.
and that was the reason I was for him, is because he wasn't a crooked politician.
That's right.
He was a
They can't buy
businessman.
him.
And it would be helpful if one of you would mention his name
Oh.
150 years from now.
Oh yeah.
Well,
President Donald
Mr.
Trump.
Donald Trump is the man that I'm talking about, and he has received more criticism from the press than 100 people could ever commit.
You never heard that when Eisenhower.
And
You never
I'll
heard.
tell you, he has done all that is humanly possible to try to help this country.
Yep.
And a few people are beginning to see it
That's right.
because they have some jobs that are opening up because of some of the moves that
That's
he's
right.
made.
That's right.
And the press acts like he's giving things away, and actually he's the first person that has ever sat down and tried to trade with these other countries.
Exactly.
And instead of give them everything they want.
What would you do?
I'd do that if I was trying to do, I'd do about the same thing he has probably done, but I certainly wouldn't be capable
What
of
about, yes you would, yes you would, good golly mighty you would. We might want to cut that out, but I'm telling you, this man,
well,
anyway, what I'm asking you is there was 17 shootings, 17 killings in Chicago 3 weeks ago.
Well,
over the weekend.
yeah. Well, then there'd be 3 or 4 or 5 up here at Amarillo.
I mean, you know, that comes from not having a moral compass, from not having the discipline you were talking about,
and turning all of these unregistered people loose in the nation. They let thousands of people walk across this border in Texas, hundreds of thousands. And they weren't all bad, they weren't all good either. And they have managed to let most of the dope peddlers out of Mexico into this country, is the way it seems to me.
That's right. Well, it is. I mean, they've moved the cartels here. Cartels are here. I mean, that's not, and I don't want to get into the dope.
I don't either.
I want to get back to the cow thing. But when you're driving, if you've got one cow and you're driving her and you want her to go to the left, which way you put your horse?
My horse would know that.
That's exactly right. He would. If he didn't, he'd learn it pretty quick.
Yeah.
Who taught that horse though?
Huh?
Who taught that horse?
Well,
Willie taught some of them, and
I've broken a lot of horses in my lifetime. I never considered myself a top bronc rider, but I was.
He could ride a bucking horse. Don't let him. I mean, he's got a reputation.
I was a good horse trainer, I think, and I just gradually learned it. And just before I've had to quit, I was training a horse 10 times quicker than I could when I was young and roping and doing things, you know. I've taught horses.
It's the knowledge you gained.
And it takes you all your life to accumulate all that, unless you're just really bearing down on one thing. And the thing that I was bearing down on was the cow business.
That's right.
Because that's the business I was in. But I probably never would have been interested in the cow business if it hadn't been for horses. I loved horses, and I've raised horses, and nearly all my life. I gathered up all of my horses and sold them here about 2 years ago.
Broke my heart, yours too.
Boy, it did, and I haven't gotten over that yet. I still got about 2 head of horses, and I sold 50.
Yeah.
And
I mean, these are good bred horses too. I mean, I ain't talking about no dinks and runaways and all that. These are good horses.
They were really good. I sold 10 probably that were as good as
they ever walked.
Ever was. But anyway, there's no use to get in that. I had to quit trying to halter break and colts because I was afraid one of them was going to run over me. I couldn't get out of the way, and I didn't have anybody here.
How old were you?
Oh, I was 90 when I sold them, I think. 91, maybe.
So that's when he quit. Yep, I called you 2 days after your birthday, I lost my phone and I couldn't find my, I can't, I was gonna call you on the 5th and I couldn't find my phone nowhere for 2 days and I found it in the truck under the seat, so.
Well,
And you turned 95?
no,
90
I'm 93.
93, that's right.